the meaning again comes out of like an experiential contact with the world in which we find ourselves both unique and belonging. And that juxtaposition suggests like I both belong here, I have something of value, and that value is in relationship to how I'm in service to these other contexts. And that participation is what sort of pulls us into um, ways of participating and serving others in the world, um, that we can't get to without that larger context, I think.
I'm here with Dylan Francisco. Dylan, great to have you back so soon since our last talk.
Wonderful to be back. It's always good to join you in these conversations.
Yeah, I was really excited to talk to you about AI and the post-human and all that. At Pacifica, you guys did a journey week based on some of these themes, and you gave a presentation called Why Humanism is Dehumanizing and Why Post-Humanism and AI Return Us to an Indigenous Cosmology. And I found that a very provocative and intriguing title for a talk, so I really wanted to dig into it with you.
Yeah, for sure. And um, I think at Journey Week it was a there was a lot of different perspectives in the room in relationship to technology in general and AI in particular. So it was I think it was a good opportunity to dialogue with multiple responses to what's going on in the world, and so I took the opportunity to sort of pull in a different angle that I thought might open up different ways of imagining this relationship.
hmm And I want to get into, the thesis here, but how was it received in general?
Um, both well and um, with concern. There was a lot of questions, a lot of um, there was plenty of pushback, and I enjoyed that because it's an area I'm thinking through myself, so it always helps to think in relationship, um, to find out, to see what I'm not paying attention to or to hear questions that I hadn't considered, and that just is part of the, I think, creative process itself.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I've been thinking about a lot about AI, particularly in relation to our creativity. Every time I open up one of my creative softwares, whether it's Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator or like even Zoom now, I'm getting
Right.
prompted to start utilizing their AI components.
Yeah.
And I keep having to ignore and close those little window prompts 'cause it's really important for me to stay engaged with the whole process and not give any of that up. Um, but I've been reading a lot of stuff about AI and yeah, really like wrestling with its implications for us creatively and spiritually. And like you, I appreciate some contrary positions. It helps kind of test my thinking and helps me kind of maybe articulate things a little more clearly. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So this will be interesting to see where it goes. I want to start with the title though, and maybe
Right.
like just kind of breaking that down, just to get some clarity on like where we're starting from.
Yeah.
So, why humanism is dehumanizing? I wonder if you could start by talking about what humanism is and like what you're referring to there.
Yes. I'm using that term in relationship to a sort of specific historical movement in which um, there was a sense that w- it was no longer necessary, and it was limiting of human nature to have reference points beyond the human in order to make sense of the human. That we can sort of create our own meaning and no longer need, for lack of a better word, as it's used in human, as a supernatural context. We don't need um, sort of larger reference points to orient ourselves. We can do that in relationship to our own minds and bodies, and specifically the material world itself. And so it was um, a sense in which humans took over, in some ways, the sense of the sacred, and reduced it all to the human, and excluded any spiritual realities as necessary to what makes us human and what gives us meaning, and what could provide ethical um, orientation to the world. We can do that from the context of the human alone. And for me, that is just a that was just antithetical to how I think of human nature, particularly in sort of the large historical context of our time on Earth. I see that human beings have always experienced themselves in relationship to a larger context of other persons, beings, energies, realities within which they are sort of an ecological part, and through which that interrelationality provides meaning and context to what human being is in relationship to the world. And so when that larger context was questioned and then rejected by humanism, that, for me, that inevitably had the consequence of us losing our humanity, because we are part of an ecological frame and network and cosmos. And apart from that, you can make human whatever you want human to be. And what that translated to in many ways was a strange reduction of the human to the machine. And the ironic part of that is that that was first sort of the model of the universe that took over during humanism. Is we have a mechanical cosmos that's ruled by sort of blindless laws, and humans viewed themselves as sort of a distinct agency in this. But as soon as that worldview took center stage, it inevitably started to saturate how we conceived of ourselves, because the world was no longer alive. It was impossible to keep at bay what that meant for human beings. And eventually we started conceiving ourselves as biological machines, as material automatons. And so the very move to sort of center meaning in the human and take it out of this larger framework has collapsed our capacity to view ourselves as more than material objects.
Hmm,
And that's why I think the humanism eventually resulted in a very dehumanizing view of human beings.
hmm. Um, One of my favorite thinkers, Camille Paglia, um, she said that secular humanism has been a disaster. I posted a clip of her doing a talk where she was speaking about this and on my YouTube, and it's totally gone viral. It's really provoking people.
Yeah.
But part of what she's talking about is the lack in public education Like, particularly, she thinks what would be valuable is a comparative mythology and comparative religious study so that we get a greater sense of how we've made meaning and
Correct.
found our place in the world through through myth and religion. And that's part of it too, right? It's like we're
Yes.
we're kind of doing away with the stories that
Yes.
helped us know our place in the universe and our role in the
Yes.
cosmos.
And I think that as I don't know who said it, but nature abhors a vacuum, and so I think inevitably it's not as if we can function without story. It's that something will fill that space, and instead of it having a a a, a lineage and rootedness in human experience over time, it sort of cut itself off from that storytelling that has held us for our existence. And then something else filled that place that was constructed from our own soulless way of viewing the world. And so we started, telling stories about a soulless universe that, again, those stories start to contextualize how we see ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, like the story is more about this mechanistic
Yeah.
cosmos and us being a kind of microcosmic,
Yes.
mechanical, biological being. Um, have you ever read the book God, Human, Animal, Machine by Megan O'Giblin?
No, I just saw that in your Substack article, and it immediately jumped out at me. That's something I need to get.
Yeah, it's a really good read. One of the things that she spends a lot of time writing about in there is um, how like the metaphors that we use to describe or think about ourselves are often influenced by the technology of the time. Like early on, we were talking about the body as a kind of steam engine,
Yes.
the kind of the vitalism
Yep.
idea of like pumps and vital
Yes.
essences and things. And then it kind of, yeah, I mean, at the point now where we're talking about ourselves like the brain is a computer
Correct.
and how this has infiltrated our everyday speech. Like when we talk about, I've got to process my emotions,
Right.
that's a computational metaphor.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
And
agree.
yeah, one of the things that I was exploring what are the podcasts that are talking about AI and these kind of deeper implications for us humans. Really hard to find other people speaking about this, but I did start to check out a talk with Elon Musk, and man, his speech is so full of these computational metaphors.
Yeah.
He totally sees us as just a computer. He's talking
Yeah.
about information that we're processing as bytes of information, and with his Neuralink upgrade,
Yeah.
that we can process more bytes of information, and that'll increase our rate of speech and communication and all of this. And
Yeah.
I I had to turn it off. I found it so chilling.
Yes. No, understandably. And it for me, it um brings to mind both something that C.G. Jung and James Hillman um, pointed out, which is that our sense of personhood is not self-derived, but archetypally derived. And what they meant by that is that we get a sense of ourselves as persons by being in relationship with other persons that are considered sort of the source and origins and powers of the cosmos. And as soon as that tether is tied to more than human persons, we lose our reference points as persons. And so there's a sort of dependent relationship that being a person is not sort of an isolated phenomenon. We derive our sense of personhood by living in a animated cosmos. And as soon as that animation, that personhood of larger realities gets rejected, we just can't hold on to our own personhood. It that tether is broken, and we again begin viewing ourselves in ways that lack personhood. And for us, that sort of means mechanical.
Hmm. Hmm. I wonder if you could just kind of tease that out a little bit more. Like, how does our relationship to an animated world help us get a sense of personhood within us?
Yeah, well, from an indigenous perspective, pers person is not just a human category. It belongs to the world. And so you'll find in traditional communities that they relate to animals, trees, rocks, even the buildings and boats and bowls that they use as persons, because personhood is a quality of the world itself. And therefore, as being part of the world, we get to participate in personhood because we are an outcome of that many-personed cosmos. And we get our personhood from that larger context. And so if we start to strip the world of personhood, of consciousness, of aliveness, of soul, then how can we, as a part of that whole, an expression of it, an outcome of it, how can we be anything different from the now dead soulless network of existence that gave rise to us? We must share in those characteristics. And so it works both ways. When we experience the world as full of persons, animated, full of soul, we necessarily participate in that. And as soon as it doesn't have that, we are going to necessarily participate in how we view that larger network of which we are a part.
Hmm. Wouldn't a secular humanist say that, well, actually, like recognizing that the world isn't animated, isn't made up of persons, but of things, doesn't that just set us apart as special and unique? We're still persons because we have this special thing called consciousness and, rational intelligence. So we're just different than the world. It doesn't mean that we're not persons, but we're kind of, we're something special. Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview.
Yeah, I think the ironic part about that position is that it's Christianity disguised as secular humanism, because the only way we can hold to a human exceptionalism in the cosmos is if we derive from some other reality rather than from the context of the world in which we are part, as if we sort of were created by something else and placed in this context. Otherwise, how can we be different from the world that gives us our very being? How can we um, consider ourselves as an anomaly when, if we view ourselves in the context of the outcome of processes of the world itself? If we cannot be an anomaly if we are viewed just in natural relationship with the world. We are an outcome of that world. So how can something distinct show up that isn't a part of the world itself. This is an indigenous argument why we can't reduce consciousness to humanity, because they say if it shows up in one part, that quality had to be a quality of the world to show up in an expression of that world. It has to be in the fabric of everything in order to show up in a particular configuration of that web.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that's, if you're embedded in that kind of indigenous worldview, you can't separate things
Correct.
like
Uh,
we seemingly have been able to, right? Like, so then the humanists would
But
say,
but
well,
we haven't been able to.
Mhm.
I think that's the ultimate argument against humanism, is that as we watch the consequence of that worldview, we see the slipping away of our ability to house ourselves as an exception. That just erodes over time. And so there can be a historical moment sort of between an animated cosmos and a secular cosmos in which we still feel ourselves as persons, but it's a holdover from the old cosmology. And as soon as the new cosmology really takes hold, we can't hold on to it. And that is shown. We just haven't been able to, over time, view ourselves as an exceptions, because this language starts taking over and we just can't. We we're borrowing a holdover from an ancient cosmos, and it just can't hold up as soon as that is truly discarded.
Mm, right. So, like the holdover being that, in Christianity, humankind was put on the earth to lord over the earth,
Right,
right? And so the humanism perspective that because we've evolved these brains that have allowed for consciousness to emerge and make us special and different and kind of, well, more than all of
right,
the kind of dumb things around us, that's still the same worldview without the kind of religious overtone, right?
correct,
Yeah,
correct,
and so then the argument is, well, that works for a while, maybe,
right,
or it seems to work
correct,
until evidence says otherwise. Like, um, how might we say it? Like, the human-centeredness cannot hold,
correct,
you know, and we're seeing
right,
that now through, obviously we're interconnected to the rest of the world, like just talking about climate change.
right.
Our actions have consequences on the greater world and these larger systems. Um,
Which reverberate back to us, and we cease to lose our capacity to exist simultaneously. So there's
right.
that feedback loop is eventually inescapable.
Yeah. Like our survival depends on having this kind of interrelational dynamic with the world around us and a sense of responsibility and obligation to the more than human,
Right,
because our life depends on it.
right,
Also, like on another level too, there's so much talk over the past, 5 to 10 years about the meaning crisis in the West.
right.
uh, you know, and so it's causing, people's sense of despair, depression, anxiety. Like if we don't have a bigger story to hold us and we're just an isolated human being trying to make it in this world, it's terrifying.
Yes. And I think that that's why sort of existentialism ultimately failed, because I think humans have an innate sense that if we are constructing meaning in isolation from the world, that it's not real meaning. I think we have this sense of like, oh well, I just like that's not in the nature of things. That's just something I'm making up to keep me going. But I don't think that satisfies humans. I think there's this sense of like meaning must be discovered as a part of a larger texture, or else what makes it meaningful? I can just construct anything, and where is it grounded in? And that I don't think that over time humans find self-created meaning meaningful.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, when there's a lot of talk about sense making and meaning making, I often think, well, we don't make these things. We sense the world, and it
Yeah,
depends on our receptivity to the world, is how much we sense it and on how deep a level we experience it. And therein we find the meaning. And
right.
the meaning is so, to me, like kind of intangible. Like I can never explain why something is meaningful to me. Like it's beyond my ability to comprehend it. And I've talked to, John Vervaeke, who's, kind of leading this movement of sense making and meaning making and addressing the meaning crisis. And he's a really big brain guy. He's I think a neurobiologist, so he knows about the brain. And I asked him, like, why is my yoga practice, where I'm in this intimate relationship with the breath and my body and how it animates me, why is that? I can't explain why that's meaningful. And he couldn't tell me otherwise.
Yeah,
He couldn't tell me either. And he said, yeah, when I do my Tai Chi practice, I have the same sense of
yeah,
meaningfulness, but I can't really explain why.
yeah.
And that to me is like the real meaning or the deep meaning. It
Yes.
does satisfy something in my soul.
Yes, because it's not um willed by us. It's sort of happens to us. We find out that this is meaningful to us as if something is making a claim on us.
Mhm.
Like this is yours to do. And we can't do that to ourselves. It's disingenuous, I think, ultimately.
Mhm. One of the ways that, I've come to understand like why my yoga practice, for instance, is meaningful to me, or why when I engage, I'm on a walk and I engage with the world around me in a particular way, like singing a little song to the ocean or to the sun, it's about participation.
Yes.
And in that participatory way of being with the world, to me, is where I find a lot of meaning. And
Yeah,
it's like I said, intangible, impossible to kind of put into words.
absolutely. But I completely agree. I think the meaning again comes out of like an experiential contact with the world in which we find ourselves both unique and belonging. And that juxtaposition suggests like I both belong here, I have something of value, and that value is in relationship to how I'm in service to these other contexts. And that participation is what sort of pulls us into um, ways of participating and serving others in the world, um, that we can't get to without that larger context, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. Like the uniqueness, like allowing for that.
Yeah,
Um, there's something in that about like, I think Hillman's idea of the soul is like the soul is part of or uniqueness is a part of what he would call soul.
yeah,
Right? Like the
yeah,
differentiation
yeah,
is really important. It's not just a kind of all-consuming oneness,
correct.
which he always
Yeah,
bristled against those kind of transcendent
yeah,
universalist ideas. We're
yeah,
all one. Ah.
yeah. And I think that's why, in a lot of ways, re, you know, traditional religious structures have failed because they also sort of try to provide a meta narrative that is supposed to encompass everyone's life meaning, and that inevitably sort of reduces the particularity of you and me in relationship to the world that has to be discovered in the experience and in the encounter and can't be over narrated from someone else. That has to be ours to find.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's reminding me of like Jung's idea of the speaking speaking about the imitatio Christi, that idea that we should imitate Christ, we should do as Christ did.
right,
And what he said was, well, that's true, but not in the kind of literal way that we take it. Like, so don't do the actions that Christ took, but he followed his own, you could say his
correct,
own dharma. He followed his own path, and that's what we're all meant to do. And that may lead you in very different directions than Christ's led him.
correct, correct. I think that's a really good way of contrasting the two of like this is a sort of image we must all mimic to be meaningful versus we each have our own image, as someone would say it, that we are sort of obligated to fulfill that no one else can.
Yeah, tend to your acorn.
Yeah,
And I love that image because, like, every oak tree is so unique,
yeah,
and I especially see it a lot in oak trees, how much they're shaped by their environment, by their
right,
surroundings, how they'll grow themselves around a fence post or grow themselves toward the sun or be kind of bent back from the winds.
right.
And so there's oak tree as this big category, but there's that oak tree and
Yes.
that oak tree, and they're all so unique.
Yeah,
But they come from a very similar seed, the acorn.
yeah,
Acorns
absolutely.
all look kind of similar, as a kind of container for the unique oak
Right.
tree that lies within.
Yeah,
And it's such a great metaphor for us as
yeah,
unique but same people. We
right.
all belong to this bigger category,
Yeah.
but there's so much
And
diversity in that, and like celebrating the diversity. It's
yes, and that gets to that larger sense of persons that's in sort of indigenous cosmologies because in that context it's even larger than sort of each human being having their own sort of soul image. Everything has its own soul image and is a carrier of its own expressiveness, each necessary to the sort of unfolding of the fullness of things, or each in its particularity. And yet they all belong into this relational context in a specific way. But there's nothing that doesn't carry that. And humans are just one form of that carrier.
right. So, recognizing person as a higher or bigger category than human. So, like you said in your talk, there are rock persons, there are tree persons, there are river persons, there's squirrel persons,
Right.
and there are also human persons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And this is where I think this is where our perspectives um, maybe diverge because part of that, and this is uh, an edge that is pushing against the grain, but part of that edge in indigenous cosmology includes the things humans make, including technology.
Hmm.
And so, from an indigenous perspective, something like AI is not unnatural and isn't outside of this cosmos of persons. It's a intelligence of its own in relationship to other intelligence and minds, and therefore can't be, from my perspective, separated out from the world of soul, but is itself an autonomous expression of soul being made in the world in a particular form.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I hear you. Like Martin Prechtel talked a lot about the tools we make having their own life, their
Yeah,
own personhood. And so then, like in the indigenous community that he was in, you would pay a lot of respect for a knife because it took so many resources to create, and that obligated you to,
Right.
to care for it in a particular way, but then also to give back
Right.
so much in return because it took so much from the earth to create this thing,
Yes.
and that imbues the knife with a kind of a numinosity or
Yep.
sacredness. Um,
Yes.
I like for me, yeah, I haven't come down hard on this at all. It's something I'm very much just kind of in the midst of thinking about. But AI, does it have agency? Does it have intelligence, like real intelligence? And I think, we have to then come up with some kind of definition of intelligence.
Well, and that's where I actually have a problem because I think part of discussions around AI want to put in place a normative monocultural understanding of intelligence. And I think that and then in relationship to that, that is sort of guarded territory, and everything else must be sort of located as less than intelligent or other than intelligent. And I find that just
Hmm.
smacks of monotheism in the sense that there's only one intelligence proper, and that has to be sort of defined in exclusionary terms rather than the world is populated with many kinds of intelligences. Human intelligence is one kind, technological intelligence is of another kind, and the knife has an intelligence of another kind that you could also say, how does the knife have agency or consciousness? But that is the experience of living and not drawing lines in terms of what belongs to the sort of sacred circle of things and what doesn't.
Yeah.
Uh, Go ahead.
That's a great point. There is something there, like our kind of concept of intelligence relies on, I think, like language
Yeah.
is so central, and that goes back to in the beginning there was the logos, there was the word, and
Not many words. The
yeah, and so like for me then, like artificial intelligence is kind of accurate because these are language-based models and they're kind of simulacra of human intelligence in that very limited way that you're talking about.
right.
And so I'm still thinking like, well, is it got its own intelligence, its own agency? I don't know, but one of the ways I've been thinking about it is like the indigenous people that I spent a bit of time with down in South America, they would say that ayahuasca is spreading across the globe because it wants to.
Right.
And so it's kind of using humans to transport it to all these different places. And,
Right.
it got Terence McKenna to take those vines and to plant them in
Right.
Hawaii and start this whole thing. And so I could think of AI in that way too. Like AI is maybe using humans to propagate itself. Like it's showing up on my phone, on my Zoom
Right.
call, and everywhere. And so, but that takes a leap of imagination for me to, and I'm
Right.
kind of like ascribing this to AI. But I feel like the jury is still out. Like I don't know if we've seen AI act in a way that wasn't prompted by human will. Is it doing its own thing yet, or will it ever? That's the big question for me.
And from my perspective, that question is too late in the sense that, again, within the context of an animated cosmos, it's our technology has always been conscious. So it's never, whether it looks human or not. And so the question is, how do we relate to other kinds of intelligences with discernment and respect? in a recognition that nature gives rise in its own way to other minds. And so, how do we negotiate that multiple mind reality in a way that, again, doesn't place it in a battle over what qualifies an intelligence, but recognize that each thing being person can have a style of intelligence that is its own. And then we're not then we're not pitting human intelligence against AI, because human intelligence in the cosmos is just as necessary in an autonomous expression of mind as what might come into being through technology. And so it's having the capacity to live in that both and space rather than who's going to win
Hmm.
over the who's going to get that battleground space of being proper mind. For me, that's like a colonizing imperative to, like, we're going to be the superior minds in the cosmos and make sure everything else is subservient to our minds. I I have a difficult time with that conception and that sort of battleground over a monolithic view of intelligence, just because for me, my computer has always been intelligent in its own autonomous way. It does things against my intentions and will, even though it's been constructed by humans. And in my talk, I suggest that humans understand this well in relationship to their own children, that they can participate in the making of something that then, even all the influence and everything that's derived from parents that goes into the child, nevertheless doesn't reduce the uniqueness of the mind of that child, its own capacity for being and being a person. And so it's this both and we can have a large degree in participating in making and influencing, and that doesn't at all mean that that thing that comes out of our participation isn't a life of its own.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, this has shown up. There's one example in Megan O'Giblin's book. Like when AI systems were first beginning, uh, the big test would be like, well, can AI beat a human in chess?
Right,
Because chess is this advanced game, and we spend a lot of time mastering it, and
right.
so we've got these chess masters. And so if an AI can beat a chess master, ooh, maybe it's a real intelligence. Um, and yeah, soon enough, it was like shown, yeah, the AI
Right.
can figure out chess and beat a human, like even the best. But then another test came up with the Chinese game Go, which is seen to have like a multitude more options than you could ever have in chess. Uh, and when the AI system that was playing the human Go master beat him, it was because the AI had made a move that no one had ever seen before in that game. Like it was a completely not and when it made the move, people thought, "Oh no, it's totally lost. Like there's no way this is going to play out in its favor." And it did.
Yeah,
And so that was a kind of breakthrough, like that it is capable of novel thinking, beyond just kind of processing the information
yeah,
that we feed it and spitting out something like a kind of generalized summary or something
yeah,
like that. And
yeah.
that's kind of amazing. I mean,
That's why I feel like it's a losing strategy to, like, make this a
like
superior,
adversarial.
yeah, an adversarial and superiority context, a contest of, like even the Turing test. It's like we want to find the place where we're still superior, and it's like, why is that the question, rather than let's assume the mutual distinction and reality of each for what they are, and letting that be the context of of discernment and relationship. And for me, I don't at all want to suggest that like AI is all benevolent and there's no danger, because that's not a an indigenous sensibility either, which the world has always housed multiple styles of spirits that may or may not be helpful or friendly to human beings. And so it requires a capacity to be like, what is this other mind doing? And how do we relate to it in a way where we are simultaneously respecting it and honoring the fact that we are also a part of this texture of existence.
Hmm.
And um, I think that gets us out of um, what I think is an eventual losing battle. As soon as we put another marker in front of us of like, oh, here's the thing it won't be able to do, it's like until a year from now, and then what? We're defeated, and this is a zero-sum game that as soon as AI can do this, now we're useless. Like that's it's just it's I
Yeah.
find it a an unwinnable mindset.
Yeah, well, and I think that's still kind of caught up in the Christian
Yeah,
apocalyptic progression, right? Like
yeah,
it's just like, oh, this is the thing that's going to bring the end times.
yes, yes,
And beware because it's gaining steam. It's,
yeah,
it's
yes,
building itself up. Um, I I think that's just kind of silly, but one of the things that I do think about is like historically, humans have harnessed the powers of nature to pursue their own lofty goals, right?
yeah,
Like, so we're gonna domesticate the horse so that we can conquer the neighboring lands.
right,
We're gonna harness the power of lightning so that we can turn it into a weapon, or
right,
on and on. And like the transhumanists are trying to harness the growing AI capacity in order to literally go colonize other planets.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so it's not so much about AI being a kind of malevolent or dangerous force, but it's powerful,
yeah,
like electricity or lightning is.
yeah,
And so I'm more worried about the humans.
yeah,
And so that's my big, what I'm advocating for is to try to like maintain our humanness
yeah,
and to cultivate soul, which is directly related to empathy and with the participatory impulse and
yeah,
all of that stuff. Because if we lose that, if we have like a soulless human harnessing the power of AI, that is where the danger is for me.
yeah. No, I agree. I think that puts that puts the impetus on like what's problematic about our relational stance to other minds, and which again our attitude is how can we put this in service to our egoic fantasies of conquest rather than how do we best all inhabit this world that's conducive to all persons. And and I think that's a that's a human problem rather than a technology problem. Not that they're not related, but I think that relationship is becomes problematic because of this as a sort of exploitive, like we want to harness all minds in service to this transcendent goal where we escape our human condition. And and that again, for me is so Christian of like finally we'll be saved from our limitation and fallibility and reach a place of perfection. And I think that fantasy inevitably fails, but it would be better if we got in front of it than just sort of follow it off the cliff to discover that AI is not our savior, nor Satan.
Hmm.
So that just requires a transformation of our human capacity to cease um, these linear fantasies of redemption.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not only Christian, but something like specifically Gnostic
Yeah,
about
yeah,
this, this pursuit to become our God, which is our
yeah,
true nature, actually, and to transcend the confines, the limitations of the gross human
yes,
body, you know,
yes,
and all
yeah.
that.
And again, it's a position of either or. There's no both andness of that. There's no valuing the distinctness that something eventually in this fantasy has to take the lead. And so it's eventually humans putting themselves, uh, reducing or being taken over by the technology, so that technology against we eventually become the technology. And that, for me, that just is this lens we're in which one thing can be the thing.
Yeah, no, you're totally, I'm totally with you on that. Like, it is a kind of a continuation of this fantasy of the human as being the one to have domination over the world, which would include AI
Yeah.
and everything else. Yeah, yeah.
As I like the reason that it strikes me in that way, because like if you read the history of the West, like there were moments in our history when you would have heard questions like, do women really have souls? I mean, can we say that? Like, and
Oh
and,
yeah.
and the same thing with with black people. Do they have minds like us? No, they
Yeah.
couldn't. They must be something different. And it's like that is a game that has never worked out well for human beings, to have the hubris to define away other minds as less than, or to exclude something from soul. It just doesn't, that doesn't unfold well for us.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess, if you have enough wealth and power, you can shield yourself from the consequences of that way of being in the world for a time.
Yeah.
But so far, nobody escapes death.
No, no. And I think that that's where like this reciprocal ethic in indigeneity, I think, is just one of those things that we encounter over and over again, regardless of our hubristic stance. Eventually, we find out that the way we are positioning ourselves towards the world comes back on us, and we can't escape that loop.
Hmm. Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about soul making.
Sure.
So that was like the focus of my essay, and it's the focus of my, like, what I'm kind of protesting against is
Yeah.
how readily creative people are taking up or using AI to kind of bypass a part of their creative process.
Right.
I hear about it quite a bit from people who are writers or graphic designers or musicians. It's seen as this amazing tool that can help make my creative process more efficient. So I have an idea. I go, okay, I've got the idea. There's a seed of an idea. I prompt it into the AI. The AI does all of its computation and all the generation of whatever images or
Yeah.
sound or whatever it is. and it spits out something that's like close enough to a final product, and maybe I do a little shaping to it, but it really cuts out a lot of that drudgery.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking up for the drudgery as having a value,
Yeah.
as being integral to what Hillman called the soul-making process, which requires effort, it requires time. Something is happening inside of us that's important as we wrestle with ideas or struggle to realize some vision that we've had, and to make it manifest in the artificing of art. There's something in that that is absolutely essential to us being kind of happy, healthy, fulfilled beings, human
Right.
beings.
Right.
What do you think? Do you have any argument with that?
I don't. I think it's um, for me, it's a part again of recognizing and honoring what is necessary to be human in sort of the fullest sense of that term. And I guess for me, again, when we relegate some of that task to something else, it's not the fault of the something else. It's a human problem to say, I have I have a desire to escape this process and circumvent it or bypass it in some way. Um, because I don't think that the creativity of AI is in competition with human creativity, but I think that humans could, if again, if they're in this positionality of one is proper creativity and the other isn't, then you are like, this is my space or it's your space, and it's a zero-sum game. And that reduces the capacity for humans to say, no, this is mine to do. Like if I want to um,
Mm-hmm.
this process and experience the outcome of it, I have to do it. And and that is just for me comes with a multiple imagination for multiplicity in which every particular thing in order to be itself has to honor what's inherent to that process for itself. And so I completely agree with what you're saying of and I think it just for me it smacks again not of the problem of AI, but the problem of our fantasies around AI in which we get to um, siphon off a bit of our responsibility onto something else. And that's not AI taking it from us. It's us
Oh, yeah.
relinquishing it.
Yeah.
And I do have an issue with that. And I think that, I think we'll experience that in different ways to the extent that we um, divide off parts of our humanity and give other things the responsibility for it. I think we become less human in the process, and that's not good for the cosmos because we're all necessary to it for me.
Yeah. I like that way of thinking about it, the toil of the creative process, of the making process is a responsibility.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about it in quite that way, but I really like that. And I think there's something to that. It's like going back to Martin Pertel, like if we're going to make a knife, that puts a lot of responsibility on
yeah,
us. And if
yeah,
we get rid of that responsibility, it's going to be devastating,
yeah.
which we can see in war and the
Absolutely.
way we treat the environment and all of that.
Right. I think there is a way in which AI can be collaborative in this process, but differently in the sense of um, let's talk about a creative process in which like I have a responsibility to a task, and I fulfill that responsibility, and yet someone else is a part of this creative process who knows other things and does things that I can't do. And that happens like in a band or
Hmm.
some other thing in which I have a responsibility to my task, and yet I can't do other things that other persons can. And I think in that way, there is room for a collaborative space in which we're not disowning part of our responsibility, but recognizing that there can be creative collaborations in which I fulfill my obligation and other minds fulfill their obligations into a larger project.
Yeah, but there's like a slippery slope between collaboration and outsourcing.
Yes,
Because I could say, well, I'm collaborating with China to make all of these plastic widgets
yes,
because it's not something that I know how to do. I just have the idea and the ability to sell and bring it to
yeah,
market.
yeah.
And we know
No,
how that turns out.
yes, no, I agree. Uh,
So
I
it's
think
discernment again, right? Like
yes,
back to
yeah,
discernment.
yes, because I think like again, I think I mean your backdrop is bringing this to mind in which like someone has the skill to sing and that is their gift and that's their responsibility and they have to hone it and they um but they can't play the piano. They can't and maybe they can, but let's just sort
Yeah.
of differentiate the responsibilities in which someone else has the gift to play the piano, in which my singing and their piano playing are not mutually exclusive, but mutually creative and supportive of each other. But that I think that it is a process of recognizing when we are owning up to what we are obligated to, or when we are saying, I just don't want to do the work of it and I want someone else to do it for me.
Hmm.
There is a difference in there, but it is a slippery space.
Hmm. I also have to, okay, so like I think that AI is good for some things and not good for other things.
Right,
Like to follow your analogy, like some people are good at the great piano player isn't necessarily going to be good at playing the clarinet. Just because they're a musician, and they have this ability in one area, like one specific area of music, doesn't mean they have ability in another area. So like
right,
AI, I think, is really good at taking in a lot of information and kind of processing it, and based on our prompt, spitting out something that can be helpful. Like
right,
research, I think AI is incredible for that and a great collaborator because it
right,
can obviously do a lot more than we can in that respect. But when it comes to producing a creative artifact, music, images,
right,
words, poems, I think it's terrible, and it puts out something that, as far as I can see, gives everyone a sense of like the uncanny valley feeling. There's something like not quite right. There's something like flat about it. And I think it's never going to be able to do that because what gives music, art, whatever kind, what gives it its significance, its meaning, is that quality of soul. And this is where maybe like there's a something between us. Like, so I think like I'm not sure that AI can ever have a soul because it doesn't have a body. And I think part of what imbues soul is being embedded in embodied in a body that has a lifespan. The fact that it's not eternal is what makes it meaningful, our life.
right,
And you could say the same of a tree or a squirrel or a rock or all those other beings that are ensouled. Part of what imbues them with soul is the significance of their lifespan. And because AI is not confined to a body, it's like this eternal kind of spirit that can go anywhere and is not limited. You know, it's never confined to any one body. Even the hard drive on your computer, it's not confined there. It can easily move over to your phone or to someone else's computer.
Right.
So I'm like, the way I've been thinking about AI is like the way Hillman differentiated between spirit and soul. And I see AI is very much part of that spirit world. And like the way that people like Elon Musk are relating to it is very much in this kind of transcendent, spiritual,
Right.
escapist kind of mode.
Right.
So AI really good for some things, but keep it out of creativity, in that way, like of the making.
I think the only thing I would the qualification I would make to your statement that AI will never be able to do fill in the blank is that I would say AI will never be able to do this like humans can do this,
Yeah.
but it can do it. It can do it in its own way. And that's where I would differentiate the necessity again for having a differentiated space for multiplicity in which AI's capacity to do something doesn't take away from our capacity to do something entirely unique as well.
Yeah.
And even in human scheme, spirit is still a necessity.
Hmm.
It's still a part of a polarity that belongs. And and even if we talk about our embodiedness, um, for most of human history, human beings have felt that embodiedness is also can be moved out of and back into in different ways that transcends a particular embodiment. And so I just think that there's room for the nature of AI that and part of the reason I want to sort of carry Hillman your use of Hillman forward is because eventually when he's talking about soul making in his chapter in revisioning psychology, he equates that with dehumanizing soul in the sense that soul cannot be located or owned by the human. It
Hmm.
transcends the human. And I think that that is part of this sensibility of humans are participatory in soul, but soul's a larger category that includes our buildings and streets and technology, and therefore it's we make soul in relationship to those things by being able to imagine in relationship to them, to sense their soul spark, and because soul is in the world. And that's sort of our inability to perceive that reduces our capacity to experience soul in the world. But that's a failure of imagination of our own soul making in which we are demarcating soul within human parameters rather than soul making, which recognizing soul is beyond the human and human is a part of soul, but not the encompassing or limitations of soul.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I do have a hard time. It may be a failure of my imagination, but I have a hard time seeing the lamppost as having a soul. I think like for me, it definitely reflects soul. It tells us something about ourselves, how we imagined it, what our, the way the shape of it and all of that. It's a reflection of soul in the way that like art is a reflection of the soul. So I think about AI because it's something that was created by humans. At least it was like kind of mothered by them, and maybe it's going off and becoming itself and all of that. But it is definitely reflecting the soul of humanity at the time of its birthing.
Sure. Sure.
Um, Whether I would ascribe soul to it or not, I don't know if I can make that leap. Um, and that might be my own limitation. But yeah, I don't know if I'm there yet or if I'll ever get there, but I definitely think it does reflect something of the state of soul.
Yeah, I think again my only way of talking about it that way is, again, it makes humans the reference point of soul. And I think that that's problematic. I think that again becomes sort of soul is a possession of human beings, and every expression of it is a reflection back of human beings, rather than soul being a larger category belonging to the nature of things of which humans are one of. And I think that that shift is prepares us to be in relationship with what is at work in the world, rather than fighting who belongs and who doesn't, and who gets to say that and who doesn't. Because
Mm,
again, I feel like that's been dangerous territory for human beings to take the imperative to define where soul ends and where it starts, because it usually circles around the human person or some human persons in exclusion to others. And that for me to get on the other side of that requires us to let go of that um, drive to define where soul belongs, and stop that as being the battleground, and learn to develop a relational sensibility to the givenness of the multiplicity of the world as it is.
mm,
Um, because I think that this is where I think about like kids growing up, if they're like if they were habituated to an animated cosmos. And this is where what's really fascinating to me about a lot of indigenous communities' responses to technology is it doesn't have this qualitative sense of it's going to take us over or take over the world. It's like, oh, here's here's something else to be in relationship to. It doesn't have a hierarchical battle to it. And I think if we had that sensibility in place, our children in relationship to their tablets and computers or AI or whatever it is, their instinct would be, what is this presence? What is its intentions? What is my relationship to it? And how do we all belong to this space without creating a crisis or killing off other minds? And that is for me, a participatory vision of the world that prepares us for the unknown rather than trying to pit ourselves from what might come next.
mm. Yeah, I feel the need to defend myself a little bit. Um, by me saying it's hard for me to see the lamppost as having a soul doesn't mean that humans have souls, everything else doesn't. It's not hard for me to see soul uh, in uh, entities that are animated, like a
Right.
tree growing, the grass growing, the squirrel having its own agency, collecting its nuts outside my window right now, preparing for winter and all of that. Um, but for me, there's a big difference between that and the lamppost or the Costco building. Uh, so I'm not there in that kind of totally holistic. Everything has soul. My coffee cup has soul. Um, maybe this has got, I've kind of given it a soul because I spend so much time with it. And, it's such a part of my day and I really love it and I want to care for it. It'd be the worst thing if I broke this particular cup. It's my favorite coffee cup. Um, so just to say that there's like a spectrum there for me. It's not just human centric or not.
Right.
So that, like, again, that may be a limit of my imagination. I don't know. Um, the other thing, okay, we still haven't gotten to the second part of the title of your talk, which is a little contentious. And I suspect this just has to do with semantics. And so I think if we tease out some nuance, it
Yeah.
could help explain things. So the first half, we've talked a lot about why humanism is dehumanizing. And now post-humanism and AI return us to an indigenous cosmology. So I think we've touched on that, but I specifically want to talk about this term post-human.
Yeah,
I find it quite disturbing that Pacifica, you are using this term post-human because I think it gives it an energy. And for me, it's wrapped up in post-human equals like transhuman, that we
yeah,
must push beyond what is human and get to the next stage of evolution, like the Ray Kurzweil view of it, the
yeah,
Elon Musk view of it.
yeah,
That scares the hell out of me. I don't want to go there. I want to like maintain
yeah,
humanness in this great tapestry of
yeah,
beingness, right?
yeah.
So I suspect that's not what you're talking about.
No, and that's why I didn't use the word transhuman in the title, but why transhumanism, because I'm framing the trans in relationship to humanism in the sense of getting past the point at which humans are the sole carrier of meaning, consciousness, a superior creation in relationship to everything else that can get to define themselves. And so, in relationship to my presentation, I'm referring to the movement not to go to make humans into machines, but to move past viewing humans as an isolated, unique carrier of consciousness that is special and superior and can define itself in isolation from the world. And so that's what I'm naming as moving us towards an indigenous cosmology, is that transhumanism as the moving past humanism is the recognition, the return of the recognition that a human is belongs to a larger context of meaning, and that larger context of meaning decenters the human from being the superior top of creation and an isolated creature that is somehow qualitatively different from the other beings that participate in the world. So for me, that is an indigenous cosmology, because in indigenous cosmology, humans are a particular expression of a larger ecology, but they're not superior to each of the other parts of that ecology. They belong to it, are in service to it, live and die with it, and aren't placed above it. And that's where I'm using that language of transhumanism.
Well,
Um,
sorry, you said post-human.
or post-humanism, sorry,
Yeah, and
my title.
I'm just saying, okay, that like wouldn't it be better to say like actually okay, you use the term post-humanism, which
Correct.
I think is the more accurate term about what we're talking about. Like we've talked
Yes.
about what is humanism. It's a
Yeah.
particular worldview that places
Yes.
human people at the center and above all else.
Yeah.
So Pacifica, I guess, used the term post-human, and I was like, oh, why? No, be
Yeah.
specific. We're talking about post-humanism, which I'm totally
Yes.
behind.
Yes. And in the context of that conference, the post-human was ex as an idea of the transcendence of being human, and the
Okay,
mechanization is is directly rejected. Like
okay.
that is not the sort of the aim we're participating in, and it's a highly critiqued position. Um, because of this fantasy of transcending what makes us human and overcoming it and subsuming it under this larger category of technological intelligence. And part of my presentation, in some ways, is also a critique of the transhuman, in the sense of, no, we all belong to this. And so part of that is getting over our superiority, but not in a way that disowns the human in the process. And so it's that both and that second part is. And the reason I name AI in the second part is also returning us to an indigenous cosmology is because for me, in some ways, it's and I in my presentation I say I find AI as almost an unconscious process of humans creating things that return their recognition that other minds exist in the world beyond the human mind. And that is almost, for me, I find it almost like a movement of the psyche itself of like compensating our devaluing and rejection of other minds and making it this thing that we can no longer bypass. We have to deal with this and confront it. And for me, that positions us in uh, in a way that is more congruent with an indigenous cosmology that simply takes for granted we exist with other minds. So how do we live in relationship to them?
Yeah, no, I think I understand you there. Like, well, thanks for clarifying that too about the use of post-human in the title of the Journey Week,
Yeah.
and that puts my mind to rest.
Okay.
It's like Pacific is not just accepting that we are in a
No,
post-human age.
no,
No,
no.
like I want to
We
fight
don't want
against that.
anything to do with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I understand like what you're saying about AI helping us to see, and acknowledge other forms of intelligences. Like, so if my thermostat is talking with me and responding to me, and I go, huh, well, this thermostat is alive, or like my refrigerator that talks to me
Right.
is alive, and that kind of thing. I guess my problem with that is it's still so human centric. Like it's got to be a human-like intelligence for me to see it as alive and autonomous and all of
Right.
that. Like my mom talks to her, what do you call it, the Amazon box,
Right. Right.
Alexis, right? And she yells at it and tells it to shut up.
Right.
So she obviously sees that as like a kind of a person in their home,
Yeah.
but she's not talking to her plant
Correct.
in that way.
Yeah.
And so I'm
No,
like, it's still not going to take people over that human-centric edge, right?
yeah, I understand. I completely understand that. I just think it's a like a it's a breach in the humanistic cosmos in this in the sense of even if it's taking on the form of something familiar, a familiar kind of intelligence, a human-like intelligence, it's still it's still sort of a something that is pushing us to say to acknowledge that I'm not the only form of mind in the world, and now I have to grapple with some other kind of intelligence that that I that I'm afraid might get independent of me, that might have a life of its own. All of that imaginal sort of flurry that comes out of AI for me is sort of breaching this conception of the world that we were the sole occupiers of the cosmos with minds. And
Mm,
so it's sort of a an edge in that I think is sort of pushing us towards this larger recognition. Well, we were never the only minds in the world. Like that was a silly notion. And
mm.
and it's sort of an edge of that returning that we like in a very strange way have done to ourselves.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think it's kind of optimistic though. Like, we could see it as like a breach or an opening to other, forms of intelligence, or we could see it as kind of propagating the idea that the human or the human-like is the only form of
Yeah,
intelligence. Like,
yeah,
you know, like for those people to make the leap to understand that trees have this intelligence, that they communicate in their own way that has nothing to do with our concept of language,
right.
like that is a great chasm that
Yes.
Alexis or Siri is not going to help people
But
make.
but in some ways, the reason it makes that breach is because for human beings, the machine has always been the opposite of the human, the opposite of consciousness. It
Right.
has
Man
been
or
our,
machine.
yes, it has been our model of something without soul. And so if that can become a carrier of consciousness, then and express intelligence that we don't anticipate, it's almost like the farthest thing from our imagination is entering our imaginal space as a carrier of mind. And therefore, if a machine can have consciousness or soul, then we are in someone's like, then trees and plants and animals, like they're less far away than the machine in human history has been.
Mm. Yeah. Again, optimistic because it presupposes that people are even thinking about soul. There has been such a split between mind and soul. Like soul is like, oh, it's messy.
Yeah.
We don't even want to deal with that anymore. But mind and consciousness and intelligence, that's one thing.
Yeah.
Soul is a whole nother thing altogether. And
But if
yeah,
you look at like conversations, especially around the origins of AI and like defining intelligence, they are inevitably surrounded by, is this thing alive? Does this thing have that language is around there as if like we can't, even if we've culturally isolated mind from soul, there's still something sort of in that bridge in which we can't have those conversations without reckoning with the question of where soul resides. I think.
yeah, well, yeah, hopefully it brings the conversation. That's one of the things I'm trying to do is bring soul into this conversation about
Yeah.
AI because I've seen a real lack of that, which just speaks to the kind of soullessness of our society. And
Yeah.
so I want the kind of the Jungians and the Hillmanians to just start having more discussions about the implications for the
Yeah.
soul and what it means to because so up until this point, and Philip K. Dick was a big part of this, going back to the late '60s, but asking the question, what is it that makes us human? And he can go through a whole essay talking about what makes us human, and does that mean that an android is human? He can go through that whole conversation without talking about soul. And I'm like, ugh, but
Yeah.
what about this?
No, and in a lot of ways that was why Pacifica made this a topic for our conference, is because of what you're saying. Like these conversations are happening outside the context in which soul is front and center of concern. And so we're sort of um, um, not being responsible as depth psychologists to not participate in this conversation. And so we have to start talking about AI in the context of soul, unless, or it's going to continually be dominated by a soulless imagination, and which just carries forward this fantasy of transcendence and the post-human and subsuming ourselves into this redemptive fantasy
Right,
rather than.
prioritizing those
Yeah.
particular Western forms of intelligence,
Yeah.
rationality, and
Yeah.
all of that. Yeah. Hmm. Good. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
it. Are you going to work in an AI chapter in the book that you're working on?
Yes, I kind of think sort of now it's sort of taking up space as a book in itself, as something to talk about. Glenn's book is fantastic, and Glenn Slater, who you had on, and so yeah, and in conversations with him, I've been able to sort of differentiate. We had a panel discussion
Oh,
where we
and you
were.
find you got something maybe to add or something different to say?
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Great.
So I think that might sort of start developing.
Yeah, good. Well, you got your work cut out for you now. Now you've
Yes.
got like two books on the
Yeah.
table. Demanding. That you wrestle with the ideas, like you're not just gonna feed in something to an AI text generator, right? You gotta like you got
Yep,
winter coming, and so you're gonna be like working this stuff out and toiling,
exactly.
collaborating with your laptop, maybe.
Exactly. My printer will print out the pages because I can.
Oh, it'd take a long time for you to,
It would.
do all that. It's been a really great conversation. I'm happy to have had it. It's helped me kind of develop some of my thinking and maybe create breaches in my own way of thinking about it. And as I go out and run errands after this call, I'm going to be looking at those lampposts and going, do you have a soul?
That's good. That's good. No, you are a mind that expands mind, and a person that makes me a bigger person. So these conversations are, for me, I find soul making in themselves, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you again.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks so much. I feel the same way, and it's beautifully put. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, man. We'll
All
talk
right.
soon. Something else will come up, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Take
Take
care.
care. Bye bye.